Namaskar. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sree Iyer. Joining me today is Sridhar Chityala ji as we talk about the effect of Trump's tariffs on United States in terms of the prices at the market on the ground, as well as what it means for India. When is it going to reach the $5 trillion GDP point, and also how does the progress of India as an economic global power is going to mean. Let's welcome Sridhar Chityala ji. Please first like this video. Sir, namaskar and welcome to PGurus channel. How are you?
Namaskar and good morning, very early good morning to you and good evening to me. And I'm doing very well, sir. Looking forward to the great session with you.
Wonderful, sir. Let's get started. So we have a small slide deck, I guess. The first thing is the tariffs and markets. See, last time also during Trump's term, they did put, I think, 10% tariffs on China, if I remember correctly, and that has not been noticed on the market. I mean, now it's 4 years. Biden did a lot of wrong things, but he did not lift the tariffs.
Very true, very true. Biden didn't lift the tariffs. He kept inflation unusually high 4 years of his presidency. He continued to put money into the market at an enormous rate of borrowing and kept the interest rates high. And then our great the Fed governor came up with a theory that he will use labor market metrics, which is unemployment rate, as one of the formulas in terms of reducing the rates rather than actually the inflation. And so therefore we continued with this dual vector inflation and labor unemployment. And unemployment, as you all know, reached 6% at one stage and slowly began to taper its way down. We had rates at greater than 5%. And as you rightly observed, Sri, nothing was done when actually the problem was on the supply chain rather than on the macroeconomic fundamentals. But anyway, many people agreed, many people didn't agree. But the fact is that remained the state of affairs during his tenure. But silently and subtly, he kept Trump's tariffs in place.
Yes, sir. And now let's take a look at what's coming down the pipeline. I yield the floor to you, sir. You can start the slide deck and you can talk to it, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So I think what we want to examine is, tariffs and threat of inflation continues the Fed to keep the rates at 2 to 2.5%. Sorry, Fed rates at 4.25 to 4.5%. While that's going on, the commodity prices have risen, notably, copper, gold, silver, aluminium, etc. They're all year to date up 15 to 7%, 17%, driven by the tariff fears. Okay, oil prices, which people directly impacts the emerging economies, notably countries like India and China, including United States, has fallen by $7 a barrel during this kind of period. It's expected to continue to come down, and both in 2025 and 2026, the average price of barrel is expected to be, this is Brent I'm talking about, is $66, next year, and around the same $71 this year. Okay, but the current prices are below $70. They expect some momentum in the price around that. When that happens, then there's much more predictability and additional dollars in average consumer's wallet. That has not been factored in the impact of the inflations, but the story is the dollar prices are going to have some positive impact to the consumer wallets in US notably and in global markets. Next slide.
Sir, before we go to the next slide, I have one question about oil in United States. January 2021, maybe within a few weeks of coming to power, Mr. Biden shuts off the tap in terms of shale processing, shale exploration of oil in the United States. They said this is not good for the world, climate change, blah, blah, blah. So that the shutting off a spigot is pretty easy. in my opinion, and that also shut off a lot of jobs, North Dakota, South Dakota, Texas, and many other places. Now, on day one, Trump said that he's going to start shale again. Sir, how long does it take to come back online so that US starts becoming a net crude producer, meaning like an exporter?
I think that is going to take about 2 to 3 years time. The new ones are going to take at least 4, 5, 6, 7 years. But some of the current leases which they shut down, which were ready to go off, I think that will come online fairly within a very short span of time. A short span here, I'm talking about less than 6 months. So there is predictable upward tick in terms of the barrels per day that United States can produce and bring the prices down.
Thank you, sir. Let's go to the next slide, please. Sir.
Okay, now we look at the equity markets. People expected, okay, tariffs, we are going to tank, we are going to go into a recession or a depression. So the story is Dow is only down minus 1.7%. S&P is down around 3%, and NASDAQ is down around 6%, and Nikkei is down around 1%. You will find that most of the European markets and Asian markets, when we look at those markets, they're actually modestly up. So therefore, equity markets have not tanked, making economic outcome towards a recession as predicted. So all these things are fear mongering, which went on by left-wing economists. Even now, economists today or yesterday, I can't recall, produced a report as to the death knell policies of President Trump and how it can have a significant impact, but without substantiating the data as to what could cause this fall that they're talking about.
Next one, please. Sir.
Yes, this is the point that I made. The European equities and Asian equities are modestly up. If we could flip the next chart. Okay, you may not be able to see it, it's too small. But if you go to any of the global market equities or any of the kind of indexes, you will find that the top three rows are the European rows, and the bottom are the Asian. You'll say all of them are up modestly, maybe 1%, 2%. I'm talking about 2025 year to date post the announcement of tariffs, Sriji.
Next one, please. Sir.
Okay. So the global currencies have actually, little bit weakened with potential implications to their economic outcomes because of the exports. So the story is there is a modest dip rather than the substantial kind of inflation or substantial price markdown in many of the currencies. I think over the weekend, India fought off, it was, I think, 86 or something. It's come back to below 85, almost 66 paise in a rupee. So you are beginning to see why is this remarking of the currencies? Because there's an indication given by the Fed that there could be interest rates coming down by at least 1 to 2 cuts in the current year. Okay, though they have kept it flat in the last announcement.
Sir, one complaint about India's exchange rate with the United States, and this is something that US also has complained, that India is a currency manipulator. See, they say that India's rupee is pegged against a basket of currencies, but nobody can create a model for that. People complain that inside the RBI or finance ministry, I don't know where, they keep changing the thing. And nobody can explain why this keeps changing. So when somebody says that it's going to be 8 rupees to a dollar or 3 rupees to a dollar, I'm like scratching my head. Here you are not even trying to, we have a gangbuster 100% increase in GDP relative terms, and you're still, you're still diluting against the dollar. What gives? I'm just trying to understand this, because some of the comments that people give on our channel, where they say you don't know anything, your son doesn't know anything, your father doesn't know anything. Listen, if you know everything, why don't you say why we are wrong? That why is never answered. So I'm just trying to ask you, sir, what exactly goes into this computation of currency to currency exchange ratio?
I think that it is, price discovery is through markets. It's India, the currency manipulation that they're talking about is, Indian rupee is floated, but RBI intervenes to provide supply, and that is how they try to keep the rate at at a specific price point range or a specific range, which is why the United States calls it as a market manipulation, because you are becoming a central bank is becoming a participative player by buying up, so that there is a less demand for it, and in the process that you are keeping the price stable. So they Reserve Bank determines at what price point they will not interfere by buying. Okay, otherwise RBI continues to buy the dollar to keep price at the range that they are, which is what United States calls as a market manipulator. As far as China is concerned, it's not floated. It begins to determine and assign, this is my price point. There's no market mechanism to discover the price as far as China is concerned. So this is where their renminbi is considered as price manipulation by the central bank.
Sir, sorry for the segue. Let's get back to our main discussion.
That's all right. That's currency is an important instrument, just as oil is an important currency and gold is an important currency in this whole kind of economic war that people are trying to fight off. So Fed, we discussed it. Fed is keeping the rates at 4.25 to 4.5%. Inflation, is also receding. There is a fear. The reason why it kept steady is that the potential headwinds that has not been computed as a result of the full tariffs flowing into the system. So therefore, they kept the rates, but they said still that the economic growth has stalled. It's come down, and we may do one or two rate what you call drop in rates. We're keeping that flexible for the rest of the year. This is what gave the markets a little bit of a positive hope, and you saw the markets rebound on Friday. Okay, inflation is currently at a less than 4%, and around inflation is down to 2.8% compared to 3% last year. Unemployment is at 4.4%, and macroeconomic signals are not alarming within the context of a depression or recession that is imminent, is what many pointed out as a result of the tariffs.
Next one, please, sir.
Okay. Now, the tariffs will continue to play a part, and we will continue to see market gyrations in the economic activity. As a result, the US GDP is expected to contract between 0.3 to 0.4%, and the target right now is around 1.7% for the US GDP, which is, it was 2.3, 2.7 last year. But we've come a long way from the post-COVID era. Now, when you take a look at if you recall, we gave a full forecast in both in 2023 and 2024. When you go back and look at those numbers, when you come today, a global GDP forecast of 3.1 to 3.3% is an outstanding number relative to that period when we are thinking of global contraction in the GDP. So, which means the markets have, to a great extent, stabilized, and even with tariffs, the expansion continues as we move into 2025, and a small increase or small decrease in 2026. So when we look at 2025, 2026, the economy, global economy or the world economy will grow in the 3% plus range, which is relatively fine compared to where we were 2-3 years ago. I know everybody has interest in the Indian GDP, and the predictions of Indian GDP by percentage. One of the challenges that you have is India projects its GDP by FY, that is March 31st of the following year, whereas the world projects the GDP and the GDP dollars in annual year, AY, right? So therefore, this calibration FY25 versus AY25, there's a 9 months lag in terms of the numbers. But the numbers are that Indian GDP FY25, FY26 is expected to be in that 6.4, 6.5% range, both by world institutions as well as Indian kind of economic institutions, as well as their what you call national budgets, which does the forecasting in terms of the outcomes and outputs that they see in the market. Again, one of the questions that's often been asked is, what is Indian GDP and when will it hit $5 trillion? Under these current circumstances, what all we have had? We have had COVID, we have had implosion in the oil markets post Biden takeover in the Ukraine-Russia war. We have had currency issues. We have had headwinds in the rates. India seems to have weathered most of those storms, looking at its own market and managing its internal kind of policies. So to that extent, where we have previous slide, to that extent, what we have is Sachin, the prior slide. Yeah. So India is 4 trillion FY25, 4.3 trillion, no, previous slide, 4.3 trillion for 2025 financial year, 4.7 trillion for FY25, no, annual year 2027. I think India will hit around 2028, the 5 trillion, slightly behind. We were all expecting it around 26, 27 or 25, 26. Because of those headwinds, Indian GDP is delayed, but eventually it will hit its 5 trillion. I think this annual year, 2025, India will cross Japan and become the fourth largest on nominal GDP. Next slide. Okay, yeah. In summary, the tariffs have not had the catastrophic impact, but they will be eventually, they will settle down with, as Trump pointed out, they will move to what we call as reciprocal tariffs. You reduce tariffs, I'll reduce tariffs. So you will find many of the countries he will work out, with the exception of probably China. Okay, commodity prices continue to be skyrocketing this year. It could go even up to 20 to 25% markups. Obviously, there's a lot of money that's moved into gold as a hedge currency. If Fed sends a proper direction with a one rate cut, you will see markets kind of gaining momentum, and then there's an upward tick happening as a result of that. I think global growth we have already discussed, and U.S. markets will continue to be, vulnerable to some of these gyrations. And at the end of the day, tariffs will settle down. Tariffs will be just as Sree pointed out in 2016 and 17. There was an inflation of about 2%, which the consumers absorbed. Whether the inflation is 5%, 6%, 10%, eventually it will be offset by some of the macroeconomic changes that are going on. So I think we'll have a reasonable settlement in terms of 2025, 2026. There's no question of a recession, at least in our minds, based on the data that we have seen. This is what we are telling some of our clients, and we expect bilateral wars between China and between the United States and some of the countries involved. That's on trade side, but we don't believe that there will be a kind of major trade wars looming in the horizon, Sriji. So we covered for you tariffs and the tariff implications. We covered tariffs and US dollar. So we tried to give you tariffs and the market mechanisms and how the markets are responding the tariff agenda, and the tariff agenda is real.
Sir, next slide, please. I think we're done, right? I have one question before we go to Sridharji. What prevents India from doing what China does? In other words, to peg it at 80 for like 5 years. Because then what happens is, sir, go ahead, sir.
It needs courage. It needs courage. And the only way it'll get courage is when it crosses 5, 6 and becomes one of top 3 economies in the world. The reason why China is able to peg it is China is a net exporter, number one. Number two, its reserves by which it will defend itself is quite significant, 3 trillion plus. Number two. Number three, it has got a government which believes that it is the only one that has the right and not market mechanism, because it determines that rate as what is suited for China. India is still too small. When India becomes as large, or at least 50% as large as China, and has the political will, it can set the price regime.
Thank you so much. These are all things that don't get discussed. I mean, nobody in the finance ministry answers such questions. So thank you for clarifying that for our viewers, because viewers do ask these questions. So today the reality is, it doesn't matter which part of the world you are. If you want to buy something from China, you have to pay for it in the United States dollar. So the exchange rate of that country with the US dollar is very sensitive, because it's always a yo-yo, right? I mean, you have to come up with more local currency if your currency is depreciated, and you have to come up with less of it if it is appreciated. But that appreciated part, I have not seen anywhere. Everything is a one-way ticket. Everybody is depreciating against the US dollar, and people say that US dollar is going to collapse. I'm just struggling with the reality of that, Sridharji. I know you and I have talked about this, that this is not going to happen in our lifetime. I just wanted to put that thing out so people understand this is not an easy math. But one word that you said, courage. Courage is important if you understand what is the underpinnings, what are the strengths of your economy. Sir, I think India should be gathering courage, because look, it is becoming the refining capital of the world. You were the first one to say it 2-3 years ago, when Iran, no, actually more than that, because when Iran got unplugged from India, India got the same terms and deal from United States, and also a bunch of FDI, which is why you are at 600 billion surplus right now, isn't it?
Correct, 650 billion, and India started to export close to about 20 to 30% of the oil was getting refined in India and being exported. But again, there's no courage to speak about it. I know Dr. Puri speaks very, very candidly on as to how he would deal, but it's almost like what you call as a trading strategy. Okay, you have an anti-Russia administration, and then you impose restrictions on India. Then India says goodbye and goes to Russia, imports oil at a cheap price. That's how India's bilateral trade with Russia now is around $60 billion. Vast chunk of it is oil. Okay, now Trump comes in, and immediately India says, well, you give me cheap oil, I'll basically switch my allegiance. Okay, now I know how to game this system. That is what is going on, as opposed to a very steadfast policy, given India is one of the top net importers of energy from overseas.
Yes, indeed. And thank you, sir. Last question before we throw open the floor for questions from our viewers. Monkey Island. This is a natural gas surplus area in United States off the coast of Texas. And I've heard talks that India has been offered, like, you can draw from there. And basically it's like you own it, although it might not be connected to geographically to India. Now, something like this is also something that Russia has also talked about, called Sakhalin Islands. And in Sakhalin Islands, I think India has a 1/3 or one more than that, not 2/3, but close to 1/2, because Japan and India are taking much of that stuff. All these things, once they come online, how do you see this relationship with Russia going? Because that means it's actually India's own oil.
Well, the story is that what you're going to observe is based on what you have seen thus far in terms of India's policy. India will continue to calibrate its policy so it is not antagonistic towards United States. Okay, number one, it has got 75% of it, or close to 70% of its reserves in US dollar. Number one. Number two, India is the largest, whether it's coming through Singapore or Mauritius, largest FDI inflows are in US dollar into India. So it's a very significant amount of money. And we have again presented that data to you before. So that's number two. Number three, India still has a lot of strategic interests with United States in the present situation. Number four, you remember the amount of, we discussed this in one of the DGIs or one of the programs which we started, the number of items on the list for import from a strategic expansion in the region, the submarines, the missiles, the drones, the heavy lift helicopters, the mountain terrain helicopters, all of this to augment its defense position, which China has been consolidating quite significantly in that upward Himalayan region in the Tibetan mountains, right? So therefore, in the Himalayan mountains. So therefore, they're not going to walk away from US in the present circumstances when you have a very assertive president. So they're going to do, what you call as a great amount of, bartering and trade and these types of tools. So they will sustain while playing, status quo game with Russia during this next 4 years, Sriji.
Thank you so much, sir. Now let's take a few questions from our viewers. Naresh Neelakantan wants to know, even though we have seen Brent crude coming down, we've not seen any decrease in prices in India. Is it getting offset for other development activities by the government?
I don't know how Indian prices are set, Sriji, whether they are market linked or whether that is government managed, I don't know. But the story is that the prices, you see the price reflection in the US markets and rest of the globe, but I don't know. I can't speak. The US, India probably has a different pricing theory as far as the what you get at the till.
Next one, please. PV wants to know, the 𝗤𝗎𝗍𝗍 tariff worsened the Great Depression. How are tariffs going to work this time? The 𝗤𝗎𝗍𝗍 tariff worsened. Why is it asked twice? So that's it, sir.
Well, I think that we have covered this. We have answered this question, which is.
I think we have answered this question. Let's skip to the next one. Yes, sir. Let's go to the next one. Naresh Neelakantan again. Even with GDP rise in India, does it really reflect the true value when we see our 1.4 billion plus population?
No, it's a 1.4 billion population is a per capita issue. It's not a GDP growth issue, right? So therefore, okay, would you like to remain 1 trillion economy, or would you like to be a $5 trillion economy? At least when you take a look at where we were from, where India was from 1947 to 2014, it was chugging along. Very happy to be subservient. It was around $2 trillion when I think Modi came to power. Now it is close to $4 trillion. It has doubled in 10 years relative to where India started. And by the time he completes this term, it could be $5 to $6 trillion. So $4 trillion was added, and definitely you can see positive developments in India and positive kind of infrastructure issues being addressed in India as a result of the rise in GDP. But one is not going to be able to solve. India will not be, a 75,000 US dollar GDP any soon. Imagine you can do the calculations. What would it take for India's GDP to be? So the greatest curse, if one has to say, or one of the issues that India is dealing with is this, gigantic population growth, whether it is purely population generated from inside, or we have had zillions and zillions of illegals flowing in over a long period of time, which was never measured and reported.
That's very true. That's very true. I mean, those need to be weeded out. Krishnamurti wants to know, reports of huge gold reserves in Odisha. How do you see this if it is true?
Very positive if it is true. I mean, it's a very, very positive momentum in terms of India, I'm told that there's a number of rare earths across the country that's been discovered from Kashmir on the north to around Orissa in the east. One of the challenges with India is around data. Okay, quantification, measurement, and reporting. It takes forever in India in terms of getting access to the right piece of information. Unless and until that gets resolved, it all remains great potential.
Next one, please. Indian Mastiff wants to know, what's Russia doing with all these rupees that India is paying Russia with? Oil money. What is India exporting back to Russia?
Well, there's one of Russia's complaints is, I don't know what to do with all these rupees. To export to Russia, they would wanting to be buying something. There are no requirements for Russia. You take a look at wheat, you take a look at rare earths, you take a look at inert gases, you take a look at their wheat. They have enough to export. They have not found something that is common. One of the things that India and Russia was working on was, localized manufacturing so that they can export more of their, defense wear or machine wear to other countries at a cheaper cost. I just don't think that has produced much outcome. So I think even direct investments from Russia into India is a very modest amount. Very modest amount.
Next one, please. SK Digital wants to know, what are your thoughts on 𝗏𝗍/AOC for next elections? They announced their candidacy yesterday. Really?
They will win their constituencies hands down, because their constituencies are flooded with people who will at any time say yes to AOC and yes to Bernie.
Next one, please. Gitanjali Rajaram wants to know, Sriji, how will India balance the purchase of crude from USA when that happens without disturbing its relations with Russia?
No, I think that we have answered this question. I think that Russia will know that these policies are, will gyrate between administration to administration. Russia has supplied as needed. Russia has pulled back when it is not needed. Russia has got enough markets that it can supply to. So I think that it will do a very nice shake hands with Prime Minister Modi. They don't want to antagonize Modi in a strategic context. So you will find that it's a quid pro quo game that will go on. But U.S. policy is not just shale, but I think U.S. policy is really to actually disenfranchise and get into the gas. That's where they are looking at. They say, we have the ability to supply gas to India more than shale.
Thank you so much, Sridharji. And that's going to happen in a very interesting way, I think, because putting a gas line all the way from across the world is probably not the way to go, but there will be some other way it will be done. We will share all the details when it becomes a little bit more clear. Sir, I'd request Hardeep Puri to come on our channel. Why do you want to go to UK and listen to some loudmouth asking questions, not even allowing you to complete your answers? We give you all the time in the world. Hardeep Puri, please come on our channel. We would love to hear from you how you've strategically planned. You have new things coming up in Tanzania for oil. You've also got some new deals with Venezuela. So India is not keeping quiet. A lot of things are happening in bits and pieces. So, sir, Hardeep ji, they've been practically your neighbor. You lived in the same city for many, many years. This is an open invitation, because I like to have people who can express their thoughts clearly. Oil, energy, you can't go away from it. Natural gas, same thing. You can't go away from it. So let's try and see how best we can all enrich ourselves with the knowledge. Thank you once again, Sridharji. We'll be back next week, same time, as we take up another important issue. Namaskar.
Namaskar. Thank you so much. Have a good evening and have a good day, Sri.